Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Tracer Burnout. I'm Dan.
I'm Roger.
And we are recording our third episode in 7 days. You all already know that we try to stack things up, and when people come along and they have an opportunity to sit down with us, we like to grab that opportunity. Plus, it also gives us a backlog so that we continue to have product to push out.
Sure.
However, it does put a bit of strain on me staring at my computer.
That's good for you.
Yeah, it's not. But at least I have my Ariel Resupply coffee to keep me going.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Very clever.
So, if you're lacking a little caffeination and need a little pep in your step, you can head on over to arielresupplycoffee.com and use the promo code TracerBurnout to get 10% off. Or you can head over to our website. You can learn more about us. You can view all of our past episodes, and you'll see the little affiliate link right there, and you can click on that and it'll take you directly over to their site.
Very nice.
Good coffee, better known business,
stay caffeinated,
and saving 10%, always good.
Always good stuff.
Yeah,
so that was very clever.
Yes.
Segue there.
But that's not the only affiliate.
So yes, we do have
yeah.
news. So it's mid-October right now as we record, and as of this week, we partnered up with another really great veteran-founded company, Hero Soap Company.
Yeah.
So really all natural products. Virtually everything is sourced within the United States. They go far out of their way to make that happen. They're out of Arizona. So really great company, make great products, and they have a certain proceeds of theirs does go to veteran-centric nonprofits.
Yeah,
Gary Sinise, to name a few.
Yeah.
There's several others. It's listed on their website, so herosoapcompany.com. And just like our friends at Ariel Resupply, same thing. Tracer Burnout gets you 10% off. So supports us, supports them, and you can stay clean.
Yes, soaps, and even though Roger and I don't need it, they do have shampoos and such.
I thought you were about to say we don't need soap.
Well, no, you're a dirty, dirty boy. You need soap.
I know a few people that would beg to differ. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. So, okay, mailbag.
Okay.
Another question that we get pretty often. Are we willing to sit down and have a discussion with somebody who served in a foreign military, foreign meaning non-United States? And the answer is yes, maybe. So, as long as it is a country that's either allied with the United States or not necessarily allied with the United States, but the person
not openly hostile,
is not openly hostile as far as their home nation is concerned. Because there's also another concern with their personal safety.
Oh yeah,
so
of course.
We'll just leave it at that. But yes, we are happy to sit down and have a discussion with allied nations and other foreign military veterans, as long as it checks a few of the boxes that are important to us.
So no North Korea soldiers, unless they're defectors.
Well, so that's the wiggle room. If they're a defector and they come here, and I'd even go so far as to say is if they defect to South Korea and find their stuff here in North Carolina and want to sit down and have a discussion, South Korea is an ally of ours, therefore by proxy, yes, I would be happy to sit down and talk with them.
And you would hope that by the time they got here to little old lonely us, then they would be well vetted. You would hope.
One can only hope.
You would hope. But yes, Australian or Finnish or Italian or...
Your good friends, the French?
Yeah, yes. The French. We might even sit down with them. Yes. But yes.
That used to be the most powerful military in the world, I'm just saying. A long time ago. Long ago.
Right.
All right, Dan. Podcast update.
Moving on. Okay, so podcast update. A few episodes ago, we played a little game called Name the State. And I gave you a list of cities where we had listeners.
I'm pretty sure I batted 0 on
You
that.
did. You got...
Although I do know Moyock is in North Carolina.
You got none of them correct.
Okay.
However, here is your chance at redemption.
You're not going to ask me what the county seat of Liechtenstein is. Okay.
How do you not know that? Nope. This is the international edition.
Oh, boy.
But this time it's not going to be Name That State. It will be Name That Country. Now, obviously, just the same way we didn't do the major media markets like Atlanta and New York and Los Angeles and stuff, we're not going for the capitals or the large hubs. So, sorry, Toronto. Sorry, Sydney, Australia.
You really are doing the county
Sorry,
seat of Liechtenstein.
Sorry, Berlin. There are some places we're not. Moscow is not on this list.
On to Berlin.
So these are other places that we have listeners in other countries, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce the names, and we'll see if you can get the country.
Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego?
I used to love that TV show.
That was great.
And the video games.
Of course.
Okay, ready?
Not really.
Okay. Remember, these are places we have listeners, not the United States. Okay? Sabadell.
It may help if I saw the spelling, so just say it one more time.
Sabadell.
It sounds Slavic.
Spain.
Okay. I was so close.
Tower Hamlets.
That is one of the waspiest names I've ever heard. So England would be too easy. So the Isle of Wight, which I think is still part of the UK, but
it is England.
Okay.
It is a borough of London.
Okay, there we go.
Kanata.
Not to be confused with Calcutta.
No. Kanata. Kanata.
I still want to stick with South Asia. Let's go with India. Yeah.
Wrong. Canada.
That's what I said. Canada.
It's in Ontario.
Okay.
Okay. Waldbrol.
Now that sounds Germanic. So Belgium, Germany.
Those are two different countries.
Right.
So your choice is?
We'll go Germany.
It is Germany. It's in Westphalia. Tama. Tama.
Now, Tama was a famous place in antiquity. It's in the Near East. Let's go with Israel.
It's Japan.
Okay. I was so close.
Karis. Maybe it's Karis. Karis.
This would be a total guess. Cambodia.
Finland.
Okay.
Ballarat.
Latvia.
Denmark.
Close-ish.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry. I'm going to try my best to pronounce this. Yuzhno Sakalinsk. There's a hyphen in there.
So, I mean, that's obviously Slavic, even for your sloping head and knuckle-dragging pronunciation of that. So, I mean, I would say Russia. I mean...
It is Russia.
Probably.
It is
Vladivostok.
It is in way, way, way East Russia.
Also known as Vladivostok. Okay.
So, they would probably take exception to that.
I'm sure they would.
To our Hungarian and Korean and some of our other listeners, I think I've butchered some of these names already, and I wasn't going to do that to you, because that would have just been awful. Awful.
Making us endure your Korean pronunciations.
The internet translation, like, you spell it out and the computer translates it for you. I couldn't even mimic that. I tried for like 3-4 days.
Your brother is fluent in Korean.
Yes, he is.
You were such a disappointment. Dan.
Thanks to the Army. A story for another time.
Such a disappointment.
But if there's nothing else, would you like to introduce our guest?
I would be happy to.
All right.
We would like to introduce to you our second Coast Guard guest, Mr. Chris Johnston. Stay tuned.
Enjoy.
Chris, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
You were somebody that I reached out to very, very early on, and so this has been many months in the making. I'm glad we could finally make it happen.
Me also.
Yeah.
So
this is going to be great. You're our second coastie.
Ooh, nice.
So for those who aren't watching but listening, he's wearing all his Coast Guard regalia.
Proud of my service.
Good to go.
There you go. All right.
Yep.
Well, we normally get started with a little bit of family background. So where are you from originally, and does your family have a history of service?
My family does have a big history of service. On my mother's side, both my grandfather and my great-grandfather. Great-grandfather was World War One. My grandfather was Army Air Corps in World War II and Korea. And then she married my dad. They went out he had immigrated here from Panama and was going to community college, as was my mother, for nursing school. And they had been out on, I think, 2 dates. And he got word back on how long it was going to take him to become a citizen. And I think it was like 6 or 7 years. And he was like, that's crazy. I'm going to have to change my major like so many times and reapply for my educational visa.
That's for the naturalization process?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he was at school one day and was talking to a Navy recruiter, and he said, it sounds great, but I can't join. I'm not a citizen. And they said, if you join the Navy, we'll make you a citizen the day you swear in. And so he signed up, went through MEPS and all of this, and this is like 1967. And he went and asked my mom, he said, listen, I'm leaving for Navy boot camp in 3 weeks. Do you want to get married or what? They're still married, so obviously, I don't know. Dad had some chops. But,
yeah, that's a smooth talker.
Yeah, but so most of my young life, he was in the Navy. We always kept a home in Hickory, and that was just base camp. He retired when I was about 8 years old, and for 3 years, we were homeschooled because his ultimate dream was to buy a fishing boat. And so we did. And there's no child labor laws when they're your children. So we worked on Dad's fishing boat and were homeschooled. You've never seen 3 kids happier to hear that we were having chicken for dinner, not shrimp or fish or whatever we could trade for on the docks. But it did give me a lust for the ocean. And I fell in love with it, and being out on the ocean underway was just like, it's the best thrill in the world to me. But living with a retired Master Chief of the U.S. Navy he was very stern, and he always preached, integrity and accountability, and most of all, consistency. And of course, I was a little bit of a wild child, so I tried to push him every chance I got. And, he was in Vietnam. He doesn't talk a lot about it. And he's a very direct question, direct answer kind of person. And the only time I really got into it with him, I think I was in maybe 6th or 7th grade, and him and my mom chaperoned our school trip to D.C. And we were going through the memorials, and everything was great until we did the Vietnam Memorial. And that's one of 3 times I've ever seen my dad cry. And
I have had a similar experience with my father.
Yeah, we got home, and I didn't confront him then. Just that's not a good time. But when we were at home, I asked him. I said, Dad, I know you were in Vietnam. I said, but also I've never seen you show that level of emotion before, except when your father passed. I said, was that something you would like to talk to me about? And he said, the only thing I'm going to tell you is I've seen more death than any human being should. And I'm glad I'm here to help you in your life to be something better than I was. And I never asked him about it again. I just didn't want to push it, And there wasn't a whole lot of, understanding around that generation of guys that came back from Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And PTSD wasn't even a term yet. They were just like, they were ridiculed when they came back.
Yeah.
And my mom, being a nurse and being the smart lady she is, she really sheltered him. She was the armor bearer and kept him out. And he has a lot of social anxiety, especially in crowds, even to this day. And I mean, he's like 75 years old, and you would think that he has that look about him. You can tell that he would probably rip your arms off and beat you with them.
Like a Wookiee?
Yeah, kind of like a Wookiee. He's uncharacteristic for a Panamanian. The reason I say that is his father was actually Scottish. And he came...
Well, the last name is a giveaway.
Yeah. Well, he came to Panama after his service in Scotland because he was an engineer and helped complete the Panama Canal. Fell in love with a Panamanian woman.
A señorita?
Mm-hmm. And stayed and had kids. So my dad grew up bilingual, but speaking more the Queen's English with a Scottish brogue. So you can tell when he came to North Carolina, he's told me stories about it. He's like, nobody understands me. And I'm like, I can barely understand you, old man. But when I met my grandfather the first time, I was like, what is he saying? He's like, I don't know. Just try to get a verb. You'll figure it out.
Just piece it together.
Yeah, the more he drank, the worse it got. And most everybody in the neighborhood learned to speak English because they didn't want to hear him speak Spanish. It was you can imagine Spanish with a Scottish brogue is like a handful of nuts and bolts thrown into a running blender. They're like, oh, please stop.
All right.
Yeah, but no, needless to say, he definitely had a lot to do with my older brother and sister joining the military, and he told me he was going to sign me over to the Navy when I was 17. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to kill people. And we went to my senior year in high school. We went to Wilmington for Easter over spring break, and he wanted to go to the train museum. And we're walking down Water Street, and the Coast Guard cutter Diligence was in port, and they were offering tours. And he was like, "Do you want to tour this Coast Guard boat?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah, sounds fun." And I was very interested, like right off the hip. And I was like, "Here's this big white boat, U.S. Coast Guard. What is the Coast Guard? I didn't even know they existed." And I started asking, the guy that was giving the tour. I was like, "So you guys are the military?" And like, "Yeah, but we're Department of Transportation."
Yes, but.
Yeah, not Department of Defense. And I was like, "Why?" And they're like, "Well, we have a different mission. It's search and rescue, migrant interdiction, drug interdiction, stuff like that. And to be able to enforce the laws of our nation, if we were DOD, there'd have to be an act of war for us to be able to do that. Whereas Department of Transportation, we can do that because we're not in the same division. The laws are a little bit different. It's a little bit looser."
Posse comitatus.
Yes. So I was very interested in it, and we got off that boat and, of course, went to the train museum. And I told my mom later that evening, I was like, "Where is there a Coast Guard recruiter? I've never even seen one. I didn't even know they existed before that day."
Asking for a friend.
Also, I'm a friend. But no, she said, "There's one in Charlotte." And I was like, "Well, that's only an hour away. I might go and, take a day
from
trip."
Hickory.
Yeah, from Hickory. And so I took a day trip down there and went and talked to them. And they were unlike any other recruiter I'd ever met before. I was a band geek in high school, so drummer. And we had a couple drum instructors. One of them was a Marine, and he was actually in the Marine Corps band and was very, very strict, disciplined. I think that he volunteered to be our coach to get me to join the Marines. And of course I was like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen, but I appreciate your time and your service," and yada, yada, yada. But when I met the Coast Guard recruiter, he kind of just blew me off. Like, he's like, "Yeah, you're probably not going to make it. We're probably not going to choose you." And it kind of put a little chip on my shoulder. I was like,
challenge accepted.
I'm like, I'm pretty smart, And
Reverse psychology.
I was like, give me a chance. Yeah. And
you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this.
He tried. It just motivated me to do it more. And so, of course, I went and took the ASVAB, this time seriously. the time previous, I was just making Christmas trees in the Scantron. But because they make everybody take that when you're a sophomore in high school, just to see. And but this time I did it seriously and scored pretty well. And he said, "Well, you do have the ASVAB score. We have to, do the physical part of it and the psychological part of it and all of this." And they got me on the delayed entry program. They said, "Well, we really don't have any dates as of yet, so we're just going to keep you on the back burner." And I graduated high school. I got a scholarship to Lenoir College for music, and I went for a year. And I didn't like it. I mean, I liked being in the band, but I really started thinking about my future, and I'm like, "Well, what am I going to do with a music major? I'm going to be a band director? No, I don't. I want more out of life." And I was still basically, there in my hometown that, I had grown up most of my life in. And I didn't really see myself being there and doing anything worthwhile, I wanted to leave more than anything.
You could have been like an elementary school music teacher and taught little kids how to play the recorder. Hot cross buns.
How about how about it just I'll catch a hot one before that happens? That sounds miserable. No. So at the end of my freshman year in college, I got a call from my recruiter, and he said, we have a date for you. It's July 19th. And I was like, could we make it a week later? I've got tickets to Woodstock. And he was like, you can either go to Woodstock or you can be in the Coast Guard. That's kind of your choice. You go now or you don't go. And I said, yeah, I'll just... So I had to call my best friend and be like, yeah, I know we were going to Woodstock. Just take the tickets. And he sent me pictures that I only got to briefly see while I was in basic training. And then they were confiscated.
Sounds about right.
Yep. They were like, go ahead and look at them. Give them back. They threw them right in the trash. I was like, that's my best brother. He's like, not anymore.
Not anymore. It's not.
The Coast Guard's your best brother.
Yeah,
Make that your favorite.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Now get out of here before I beat you. But telling my parents that I was dropping out of college, of course, my mom's first go-to was, well, what are you going to do with your life? I said, I guess I'm going to go join the Coast Guard. And she said, no, you're not. And I said, well, actually, I'll leave for basic training July 19th. It was about 2 months before I left. And, of course, she said, you're just going to go off and die. And I was like, Mom, it's the Coast Guard.
It's not quite, yeah.
It's not the same. She's like, but it's still dangerous. It is the military. I'm not stupid.
How encouraging.
Well, my dad's only question was, why the Coast Guard? And, of course, I love, joking with my dad. So I said, well, I got 3 reasons, Dad. He said, okay, let me hear them. I said, number 1, I was already a naturalized citizen when I was born. Number 2, I scored high enough on the ASVAB to have a choice. Number 3, I don't want to kill people. I want to save people. And he, of course, fired right back with a joke. He's like, well, at least you're 6 foot tall. If that ship sinks, you can walk back to shore. And I was like, okay.
That's nice.
So this is what we're doing. You got jokes? That's good. But every time I graduated a school or advanced, my dad showed up in uniform to pin me. And
that's awesome.
It was really great. One of the schools I went to was actually a mixed school, so we had all different kinds of, services there, and most of our instructors were Navy. And of course, a couple of the instructors first day at that school, I'm in my, my Bravos, and it's got the big white bus driver's cap, and they almost saluted me, and they were, oh, it's a coastie. So yeah, and they just absolutely hated us from day one. So they were very, very hard on us, especially in the physical part. And graduation day, when my dad showed up, and they were like, no wonder we couldn't drown that little puddle pirate. Look at his old man. He's Navy Master Chief. And they were like, very nice to meet you, Master Chief. And he was like, you guys were unsuccessful too. And they sat there and joked about, he's like, I didn't teach him to swim. I was trying to drown him.
Quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah, he's like, I got 5 kids. I needed less mouths to feed. But
well, he didn't need your child labor anymore.
No, I was legally an adult, but technically still a child mentally. He was like, not anymore.
Well, that may still apply to all 3 of us, actually.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it does on some level.
Where was your basic training?
Cape May, New Jersey.
Okay.
The only Coast Guard basic training.
That is correct.
As far as I know, it's always been that way.
No, there used to be a basic training in Alameda, California.
Okay. West Coast.
For most of the West Coast people that enlist. And then they just decided, given the fact that it is such a small service, that they could just do it all out of Cape May.
Just make it a bus ticket versus having a whole separate installation. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Well,
that's probably part of it, yeah.
Nowadays, they fly you to Philadelphia, and you wait at the USO for hours on end until they get a bus that buses you down there. And, of course, that's where you step off onto the little golden triangles, and everybody's yelling at you at full volume, and nothing you can do is good. But
so just let's kind of loop this into time and place. So what year is this?
This is 1994, July 19th.
Mid-90s. So it's
yep.
Cold War's over.
Right.
A couple of years after Desert Storm and Somalia.
Yep.
Short-lived. So we're in the peace dividend now.
Well, we still had troops.
Of course.
Because everybody got the National Defense Ribbon. Which was, I was like, I don't even know what this is. that they're like, well, technically you served during wartime, so you're going to get the medal. I was like, so it's a gimme? Okay. But, you know, throughout basic training, you have an opportunity to earn 2 other ribbons, at least, possibly 3, for your marksman for pistol and rifle. And, of course, if you shoot well enough to be a sharpshooter, it has an S on it, and if you shoot expert, it has an E on it. I was lucky enough to get the expert because, you know, my dad. And we grew up hunting and fishing and all of that, so from a very young age, we all knew how to handle a firearm. And I guess it kind of paid off when I went to basic, which was excellent. And then if you were smart enough, there was one called the Super Boot. I don't know if other services have that, but it was for the highest scoring recruit when you graduated. And it was like a red, white, and blue ribbon with one little yellow stripe in the middle. And I was like, I'm so glad I didn't get that, because they call it the Super Boot ribbon. And when you go to your first unit, that's probably going to be your nickname for the rest of your life, Super Boot.
Well, the Army doesn't have, or didn't, maybe they've come up with one now, but the Army doesn't have anything like that. If you are the honor graduate, then you may get an Impact Army Achievement Medal.
AAM or something, yeah.
And then like a $25 gift card to Chili's or something. But,
Ooh.
Yeah.
Don't spend it all in one place.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can get some chips and salsa
Yeah.
and an overcooked steak. Delicious.
Yeah, but it's typically something like that. But I mean, an Army Achievement Medal is worth promotion points. So
True.
it does in a way set you up for success moving forward.
So your rating,
Machinery technician, MK.
which is what you want, that's what you wanted when you signed up for, or was it needs?
In those days, you took the ASVAB, and you know there's several different parts of it, and they combine different categories. What you scored in that section for your qualification for different schools. But everyone goes in as a non-rate, and you're going to do at least a full year as a non-rated personnel before you're eligible to apply to an A school. You have to make E3. I was an Eagle Scout, so I made E3 pay from day one in, and graduated basic training as an E3, but I didn't get to wear the E3 stripes until I had been in 8 months, because you had to have at least 8 months time to wear the seaman or fireman stripes.
Yeah, I do seem to recall Cody discussing the same thing. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So I actually wanted to go to damage controlman school, because those are like the carpenters, welders, stuff like that, pipe fitters, and that really interested me. But the school list, if you qualified and got your whole package in, was still like 2.5 years. And MK, which is the largest rate in the Coast Guard, they were going a class every 3 months. And I was like, I could go to MK school and then apply for DC school, get on the wait list, and I'll be getting paid as an E4 while I'm waiting to go to DC school.
Makes sense.
Well, once I made machinery technician and got my new station, I really liked the work. So my first unit at
Okay, before we go there, where did you spend your year waiting to apply for your rate?
I actually spent 2 years, almost 2.5 years before I got to go to MK school, because I got in trouble. You know,
He's burying the lead.
As young service members are wont to do.
So you know, you fill out your paperwork for your first duty station, and it goes to a detailer, and they call it a dream sheet. You know, you tell them where you'd like to go, 4 areas you'd like to go to, 4 units you'd really love to go to, and 4 that you would definitely not want to go to. And out of the 4 you definitely don't want to go to is where they're going to send you.
Of course.
I didn't put anything on there, but I found out later from one of the Coast Guard personnel that was a detailer. He said that's really where they pick from, and if you leave it blank, they'll put you wherever they want to. There is kind of a directive, especially coming out of basic training, that if you're an East Coast civilian, you're going to be a West Coast sailor. And if you're a West Coast civilian, you'll be an East Coast sailor. They put you opposite of where you came from, so that on your off time, you don't go home, get involved in bad habits with your old high school friends, because they've already invested this much money into you and making you into a Coast Guardsman. They don't want you.
That there is some logic to that, but at the same time, you're also removing that service member from their natural support group.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the edge cuts both ways.
Yeah, which is something that I had to overcome. It was very difficult for me. Right out of basic training, I was assigned to the Coast Guard cutter Polar Sea out of Seattle, Washington. It rains a lot in Washington.
Yes,
like,
it
I've heard.
does.
Yeah, like 90 inches a year.
It rains coffee. That's
Yeah.
what I hear. Is it
Yeah.
something
And
like that?
after you've been there a while, moss starts growing on your back, your toes start webbing.
Mm-hmm.
But so it was a polar class icebreaker, and their mission, there was two of the Red Fleet, the Polar Sea and the Polar Star, and their main goal is to take scientists into the polar regions and for research purposes, and also they have a deep freeze mission because there are several different several different bases in Antarctica. And so we would go down there and we basically cut a big pie slice into the ice and chop it up to where it's called fast ice. And we go back out and tow a fuel ship in to refuel them so they can last another year before their winter sets in. Because at that point it's not feasible for us to be able to do the mission. The ice is too thick. Which is odd because I wasn't ready for polar operations.
Is anybody ever really truly ready for polar operations?
Yeah.
I mean, being a teenager from Western North Carolina, then being sent to the frozen Pacific Northwest.
And I didn't really understand about like life on a ship that big, because to that point I'd never been on a cruise or anything like that, and I'd only ever been on my dad's fishing boat, and it was a 95-foot shrimp trawler, and yeah, the ship runs 24/7, so the way they structure it with the watches and everything else, it goes, there's a meal at 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, breakfast and dinner. There's a meal at 12 noon and one at 12 midnight, lunch, and what they call mid-rats for the mid-watch people. So the reason they do the mid-rats is because if you have the mid-watch, you get off at 4 in the morning and you get late sleepers. You don't have to get up and be a part of the workforce again until 10 o'clock. So you miss breakfast. Mm-hmm. So that's your third meal of the day was mid-rats. And that was fine when we were free routing because, you still get sunrise, sunset, and you can kind of keep track of days. When you get down into the ice, the sun makes one little circle in the sky, and after the third day, you forget, is it morning? Is it night? Am I sleeping? Have I slept? What is today?
Am I even real?
Yeah, and of course, it trauma bonds you to the rest of the crew because you're all just weary and, when you're breaking ice, all of the crew berthing is right around the water level, and it sounds like a train wreck. I mean, just all this breaking ice, and it squeaks and squeals and pops, and eventually you do get used to it. But they call them polar rollers because it's like a floating football. When you're free routing, it rocks and rolls a lot. When you get in the ice, it's very stable, unless you get ice caught under the boat, and it'll mill it. It shakes everything. And it's an amazing ship engineering-wise, just for what it is. But
can you talk about that?
Yeah,
just the mechanics of how the ice splitting works. I know nothing about this.
So when you're free routing, it's diesel electric. Okay. So you have 6 diesel engines that turn electric motors to turn 3 shafts. The shafts always turn the same way. And they have what they call a CPP, or controllable pitch propulsion. They can change the pitch of the blades on the shaft to go forward and backward.
Okay.
But once you get into the ice, that's not enough power. So they also have 3 Pratt Whitney turbines, and these things are ginormous. They take up an entire space that spans beam to beam, port to starboard. And they're really loud. And there's a lot of muscle. And the way the ship is formed, the hull of it is about 7.5, 8 inches thick. And the weight of the ship is actually what breaks the ice. Once the ice is broken under the ship, the shape of the hull lets the broken ice flow up and pop out.
So it displaces it that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it creates occasionally, like I said, you get a piece of ice stuck under you and it'll get back to the shafts and you mill it and it shakes the entire boat, or worse yet, you get stuck, like you wedge yourself in. And they have a healing system. And basically it's 3 tubes at different points in the ship, and it transfers about 10,000 gallons of fuel from port to starboard in about 4 seconds.
Oof. Wow.
And so
impressive.
They pipe it when they're like, all hands prepare to heal, secure all hatches, use that
It's about to get rough.
Yeah, and so you find a nice corner and a couple handrails and just hold on, and the whole ship rocks about 30 to 40 degrees. I mean, you can stand on the walls.
Wow.
And then they're like, all right, we're free to back up, and you go right back to breaking ice.
So for the hull, what kind of metal is that? I'm assuming it's steel, but it could be something harder than that.
It is. It's Corten steel.
Okay.
And it's hardened and it's layered.
Yeah.
So the total thickness of it, like I said, is like 7 inches thick. In the main thwartship hallway, right in front of the galley, there's a Coast Guard emblem that is cut out of the same metal and thickness as the ship, and so everybody, when you do tours, you can see it. That's also where they track the entire cruise, like, here's where we went, this is which way we went, so you can see it. And in my first 2 years, I think I ended up doing 72,000 nautical miles, because we go a very long way.
So go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
So how often does the ice get stuck to where you have to do the healing process?
I think, it depends. Going to Antarctica is a lot different than if you go north and do what they call an Arctic West tour, because there's no continent up north. It's just a frozen ocean.
Just Santa Claus.
Yeah, well, we didn't find him, but I looked.
Not for lack of trying.
Right. So when we went south, I think we only got stuck twice, maybe 3 times. But when we went north, we got stuck almost every other day.
Wow.
So, and they don't give you a definite time, as they never do on any kind of deployment, because you don't know what you're going to run into, if you're going to break down, like whatever's going to happen. And it definitely drags on the morale of the crew. I mean, there was 130 guys permanent on that boat, and then we'd also carry a flight detachment of about 30 or 40 Airedales and 2 helos, and then 50 or 60 scientists. So we had berthing for about 210 people total on the ship. And it gets monotonous after a while. It starts to wear you down after about maybe 3 weeks. It's like you see the same 130 people every single day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be even less than that, wouldn't it? Because you're really only seeing, with any frequency, the people on your shift.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I mean, it wouldn't even be, the 210 people or whatever. It might just be
You see them at quarters,
yeah.
like every day. And when you do have some off time, of course, if it's warm, we'd go out on the flight deck. We always called it Steel Beach. And, you'd hacky sack with the other departments, or maybe play basketball, but eventually you lose the ball to the ocean. So.
Another casualty.
Yeah.
Wilson!
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times that's happened. It'd be like, smooth move, FedEx. Who's got another basketball? It's like, I was so close to winning the game. And if you work with the roll, it was the first time I ever dunked. I mean, I'm a skinny, short, white kid, but if you work with the roll, you can do it.
The swells.
Yeah.
Yes.
You get to a point where you have to learn to do that. Otherwise, you're just physically exhausted all the time, because if you work against it, you're fighting this inertia constantly. So you wait to go up a ladder when the swell is coming up, and you can take a 14-step ladder in about 3 steps. If not, you can take 6 steps and you're still at the bottom. Same thing going through hatches. You wait for the swell, open the door, and the swell opens the door for you. Step on the other side.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, speaking of the rolling in the waves, how common? I mean, it's the Coast Guard, so I don't know how common this would be, but how common is seasickness amongst the crew?
If you've never been underway before, it's going to happen. Everybody gets seasick their first time underway. It takes about, at the most, about 2-3 weeks to get used to it. Once you establish your equilibrium, you get used to it, and then the problem becomes being in port. you get so used to it that when you are back, on dry land, you sleep a certain way with a foot on the floor or pushed up against a wall because you always feel like you're moving even though you're not.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and the berthing is probably the best you can get in the Coast Guard for an afloat unit on a polar class. Even as a non-rate, the largest berthing is 12 man. And then if you're what they call a bull non-rate, which is an E3 who's been there the most time, you can get a 6-man or a 4-man. Of course, I ended up in a 4-man, and that was so premium because you could actually sit up in your rack, and had a little curtain that you
nice.
Actually had some personal space.
Right, a little bit, not a lot,
of course.
They do try really hard to keep the morale high in a scenario like that. And of course, we had space to work out, and there was a library, and of course, everybody brought movies and music, and it just kind of broadens your horizon because you get tired of your music that you've listened to 100 times, so you start borrowing music and trading out, and that was when I realized I really like country music. I think I listened to the entire Garth Brooks collection.
It was the 90s.
On that first trip, he was very popular, and I was like, I'll give it a listen, whatever. But, and our...
Just listening to The River by Garth Brooks, tears streaming down his face. Yeah.
Those aren't tears. That's, the splash of the waves.
Right.
My eyes were sweating.
Of course.
It's completely manly. It happens sometimes.
So you did that for your first 2 years, the ice crushing?
Oh, yeah.
I have a couple more ice questions before we move on. But.
Okay, certainly.
Good.
Did you ever have any really interesting discussions with any of the scientists?
Yes.
Please share.
My first Arctic West tour, which ended up being back-to-back. Like I said, I was on the Polar Sea. We had a sister ship, the Polar Star, or as we called it, Building 10, or the Polar Spare, because it seemed like they never got underway. I made 3 back-to-back trips. We were supposed to do one, then they do one, then we do the next one, so on and so forth. But we ended up doing a back-to-back, and we stopped in Nome, Alaska, and picked up about 40 scientists. And we were up there. Now, in my division on the ship, I was in the engineering department, and I was in a group called the A Gang, or the Auxiliary Gang. There was 2 groups, the main propulsion and auxiliary. Main propulsion deals with everything that makes the boat go forward. Now, we cross-trained because we had to know their job and they had to know ours as well. Yeah. But in the auxiliary gang, you deal with everything that doesn't make the boat move forward. So all of your boilers, evaporators, AC units, heating, cooling, all of that stuff, compressed air, that's all your job. That's your game. Also all the transfer pumps for oil, fuel, water, all of that. So, and of course we make our own water, so you have to know which valves are what and all this, and there's a very intense qualification program because you have to know all of those systems on the boat, and you have to do drawings for every space and where the firefighting equipment is at and how to get out in 3 different ways, how to egress a space. So that was very interesting. But when we got these scientists, they had a problem with one of their steam lines in there, and they needed steam for something because they had to keep a certain temperature for this, that, or the other, and the easiest way for us to do that was via steam instead of electricity. So I had to go back there and check the lines, and it ended up being a clogged steam trap. And they had been doing these box cores where they would send this huge box down to the bottom of the ocean and bring up like a bunch of dirt, and then they would analyze the dirt. And then we'd stop every once in a while. They'd throw a brow down, and of course there'd be a few of the party that would go out there onto the ice with the scientists, and then Polar Bear Watch would be on the ship because a polar bear will actually hunt a human.
And Polar Bear Watch is a metaphor for what?
No, it's not.
No, it's actual polar bear.
It's absolutely polar.
That was a joke.
If you see a polar bear, just don't let it eat the humans till we can get them, So, and yeah, it was pretty neat. But I finally got around while I was fixing the steam trap, and I asked, she was a cute scientist too. And of course, it was the only woman I'd seen that was actually cute enough to talk to that didn't wear a blue uniform.
Fair enough.
In 3 or 4 months. And I said, what is it you're researching or whatever? And she said, well, my particular group is looking for an enzyme that works well at cold temperatures. And I said, okay, well, what would you use that for? And she said, well, it depends on the enzyme, but what we're looking at now, what we have found consistently, is an enzyme that works below 0 degrees, and it actually eats organic matter. And I said, okay, well, what would you use that for? She said, they're going to put it in laundry detergent, and that's why we have 0 degree or cold temperature Tide. That's what the enzyme is. That came from one of those research things. And I was
That's
like,
pretty cool.
That's super interesting. Sounds like a Jeopardy question.
It also sounds like something you could make into a super weapon. But I've said too much.
Yeah. That's where I thought it was going.
I don't know anything about that. I can neither confirm nor deny.
I've seen enough sci-fi where I'm like, when you start digging around in the ice, you're going to unleash some kind of alien life form or super bug.
It's okay because there's that large warehouse the government has with the Ark of the Covenant and all this other stuff that's tucked away somewhere, and no one will ever find it.
I think Jimmy Hoffa's the loadmaster there.
Yeah, he's in there too.
Yep. on his sacred mattress. But no, it was the best part about being on that ship is just in general the miles you cover, and also if there's any point of land close, they gave us, because it is arduous duty, you got max liberty. So we went to Hawaii, we'd be there for 8 days, and there's 4 duty sections when you're in port, so you have 3 days off, 1 day on. 3 days off, 1 day on, then you get back underway for a couple of weeks, and then we pull into Fiji, New Caledonia, Australia, Hobart, Tasmania, Christchurch, New Zealand, Cartagena, Colombia. Anywhere we went, it was like we're going to be there for 8 to 9 days. And then coming back out of Antarctica, we had a problem with one of our turbines, and the only place that we could get into was supposed to be Newcastle, Australia. But there was a storm coming in, and they wouldn't come out to get us. And so we turned around and went back. We had already been to Sydney like 4 months earlier, and we went back to Sydney, which I thought was great.
Man, of all the places in the world to get stuck.
Oh, war is hell, I tell you.
Well, Australia's really nice if you're a single guy. The women outnumber the men 8 to 1, and Australian men don't treat women very well.
They like Americans.
They had signs, "Take me home, sailor," blah, blah, blah. I actually met a nice young lady, and she introduced me to her family. And they were like, "What do you want to see while you're in Australia?" And I was like, "I don't know, wallaby, kangaroo, like maybe the outback." And so, yeah, they hosted me and took me to see all of the stuff. And I was like, that's great. And there towards the end of my visit, I was like, well, I've got to go back. I have duty tomorrow, and then we're getting underway the day after that. And he said, well, I'm sure my daughter has given you her address and all that. He said, keep in touch with her. He said, if you'll marry her, I'll put $100,000 in your bank account. Just take her to the United States. I don't want her to marry an Australian guy. I was like, I'm 19, dude. I'm not that guy. So, yeah.
Were these 100,000 Australian dollars?
Which would have been more, yeah. Actually, it would have been less American. I remember pulling in there because we'd been underway like 4 or 5 months, and we went to the dispersing office to, get cash out of your bank and then change it into Australian money, which looks like monopoly money, mind you. And I think I pulled out like $400, and it was like $900 Australian. I was like, this is amazing.
There was a time when the American dollar was worth something.
There was. I remember those times. It was good. And of course, that's also back when, here in the States, everybody's like, Foster's, Australian for beer.
Yeah, I remember the Aussies went in the 80s and 90s. They had their cultural moment here.
Yeah, well, Crocodile Dundee ushered in a lot of that. But it was funny because I remember, the drinking age over there is 18. And so I was 19. I was like, I'm going to go.
Sweet.
I'm walking into this bar, and I went up there and I was like, yeah, can I get a Foster's? And the guy next to me goes, mate, are you broke?
That's piss beer.
And he's like, you got to be broke if you're drinking Foster's. And I was like, no. He's like, you're a Yank. Get him a VB, which is Victoria Bitter. And that was probably one of the best, still one of my favorite beers to this day is Victoria Bitter. Of course, we can't get it here in the United States because it's not pasteurized. So It's only local.
Right.
But we can get Tui's, which is pretty close, just not exactly the same.
Well, our Aussie friends, those guys, and Shayla's can drink.
Yes.
Oof.
Yes, they can.
That's their favorite thing to do.
It is it's them in Wisconsin. Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You know who you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we do have listeners in Australia.
Oh, I loved being in Australia. I really, really enjoyed it. I've been to actually 4 different places: Newcastle, Sydney, Perth. No, just 3 places. Because then we went to Hobart, Tasmania, which was a lot like Australia, but they don't like to be compared.
Correct.
Did you meet the Tasmanian devil?
I did get to see one, but I wouldn't say it was like the Bugs Bunny version. They're actually a little bit smaller than that, and they get killed a lot. Because whatever you hit on the roadside, they'll come out to the roadside to eat it, and then they also get run over.
Yeah.
So, yeah, one of those situations. They use that as a training example of like, if you see your buddy laying face down in the space, don't go get him, or you'll be the second person laying down there. Obviously, we need to have a gas-free engineer, because if it's something that went on wrong in there, you don't want to be the second one and be like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" You know, you're the second one.
That makes sense.
He said, don't be like the Tasmanian devils. You go to eat the stuff too and be like, "Hey, there's my buddy Fred, and he's all flat," and you're the next one, you know.
So they were actually telling them to not go eat their dead comrades. That's good training.
It sounds logical when you're talking about
I mean, when you
the
really
military.
think about it.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't do it. It's a bad idea.
So is comparing a Tasmanian human being, Dan, not an animal, to an Australian, is that like Okinawa to Japan?
Yeah, it's just it's foreboding.
Yeah, don't do it.
It'd kind of be the same as comparing someone from Florida to someone from, Georgia. They'd be like, "We're 2 different states, man. We don't do that."
England and Wales.
Good. That's a good one. That's a good one.
History.
That's a good one.
Scottish and Irish.
American and Canadian.
Yes. Sounds like there might be a history there, Dan. We shall explore.
I love it when people say, "I'm Scotch Irish." No, you're not. No one would admit to that.
This would be an interesting full-blown diatribe, because the Scots actually are Irish.
Very true.
But
they don't claim it, though.
Of course not. Things evolve over generations. But let's not go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, let's not.
So 2 years of crushing ice before you got your rate.
Before I got my orders to go to A school, and it was great. When I got there, I was in Yorktown, Virginia, and in my class, I was the person that had the 3rd most time in service. So I got to be one of the class officers. We had a class president, a class secretary, and a class master at arms. So I was the class master at arms, and it was my responsibility to make sure that all of our training spaces were cleaned after every time we were in there daily. And so I had to coordinate that, and given the size of our class, I'd be like, there'll be 3 of us every day that clean the space, myself included, so on and so forth. The good news was I got out of standing duty the entire time I was in school. So like every 3 or 4 days, they'd have to stand watch, around. There was always someone on watch 24/7 in the building, so that people didn't come in unauthorized, and so on and so forth. I never had to stand that duty, which was awesome.
Got to sleep uninterrupted.
Well, yeah, and the base there in Yorktown, they have lots of things. They have, a huge MWR where you can rent boats and campers and bikes and you name it. And also, they have the lists that you can sign up for every week. And by the end of the week, they draw and you get tickets to something, whether it's the Hampton Tides baseball game or tickets to Busch Gardens or, whatever concerts rolling through. Actually won the tickets to Neil Diamond at the Hampton Coliseum.
The Hampton Coliseum.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't really want to go see Neil Diamond, but I had 4 tickets, and it was a sold-out show. And I tried to trade them for everything. I even threw some cash in there and be like, "Come on, man, just hook me up, man." And nobody wanted them, so I ended up telling my roommate, because he had a car, I said, we're going to this Neil Diamond concert. And he's like, "Really?" I said, "Trust me, dude, I'm going to make it worth your while." He said, "Fine, I'll go with you." And I said, "I have 4 tickets, and it's a sold-out show." I said, "We're going to find 2 of the hottest women we can find.
Probably
tickets.
Boomers. Yes.
Right. Any port in a storm." And I said, "I'm going to give them these 2 tickets if they'll buy our beers all night." And he's like, "That's a great plan." And that actually happened. We found these 2 ladies, and very nice ladies. And they bought us beers all night. We watched. It was a great show. Guy came out and just killed it, and yeah, he ended up hooking up with the lady that he was sitting next to, and they're still married to this day.
He's not talking about Neil Diamond, Dan.
No.
Okay, all right.
No, but he was pretty amazing, and I've forgotten how many Neil Diamond songs I knew until I was at that concert. I thought, thanks, Mom and Dad, weirdos.
They going to America.
That's one of my dad's favorite songs because he's an immigrant.
That rings true to him. Yes.
Yeah, it does.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So,
did he do an encore on Sweet Caroline?
Yes.
Of course he did.
Yes.
Of course.
And everybody's got to sing that song.
Of course.
Everybody at the top of your lungs.
But, it's one of the best karaoke songs ever.
It's true.
But they also had a lot of other. They had a really huge gym, a really nice pool. They did intramural softball there, and they had an enlisted men's club. Which
Back when that was a thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So at the E Club, you could go if you missed chow, which the chow hall wasn't the best food, but you could sustain on it. But if you went to the E Club, you could get Philly cheesesteaks and pizzas and stuff like that. You could also get a pitcher of Long Island iced tea for like $7.
Good grief.
A pitcher. That's 4 Long Island teas for $7. I was like, this could be dangerous.
Sounds like another challenge.
Yes.
The only thing is when you walk into the E Club, don't walk in with your cover on. There's a bell behind the bar, and there's a sign that says, "Ye who entered covered here must buy the bar around to cheer, or else be asked to leave." So if you walked in with your cover on, the bartender would ring that bell, and you had to buy everybody sitting at the bar around. And it was almost always packed. So 9 times out of 10, you'd just leave. I won't say that I didn't fall into that trap. I did, but it's because we pre-gamed. And I walked in like an idiot, still wearing my cap. And I was like, what's it going to be?
Rookie mistake.
Yeah, it ended up costing me about $80. But
That's actually not bad.
Well, considering it was a military bar, we didn't pay full price. It was
and it was also the late 90s by this point.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we had, but they had karaoke and then have different bands, and it was nice. You really didn't have to leave the base that much, which I liked because, especially just that Coast Guard stigma you learn to live with because you're not a real service. But there in that portion of Virginia, you're really close to Norfolk, so there's a lot of Navy sailors, and they love to, chide the Coast Guard a lot, and you can tell they'd be like, "Oh, where are you stationed?" and blah blah blah. I mean, they can tell by the way your hair is cut that you're in the military, and if you said Marine or Navy, you had something in common with them, and But if you said Coast Guard, they were like, "We hate this guy."
Well, I happen to know that in that area, you have, of course, a lot of sailors. You also have all the Army boaties.
Yep.
Are in that area too.
Oh, is it Fort Eustis?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Story. Story and Eustis, which are
Yep.
technically close to each other, although they are separated by a body of water. But so any good boatie stories for the Army while you were a Coast Guard guy in Hampton Roads there?
No, because most of my time there was not dealing with those units. I was just learning how to, the first time, just how to fix the boats.
Just school mostly?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
So, and it's basically, our school was, machinery technician school is geared towards a lot more of the small boats, which is the mainstay of the U.S. Coast Guard because they do a lot of search and rescue. So there was a higher probability that you were going to be sent to a shore unit versus an afloat unit directly after school. And there's 3 different fleets inside the Coast Guard. As a non-raid, I was in the Red Fleet, of course, the research fleet for the polar rollers. There's the White Fleet that you always see, and those are the patrol boats and the high-endurance cutters, and they do a lot of fisheries enforcement, migrant interdiction, and drug interdiction out on the high seas. And then you have the Black Fleet. And the Black Fleet is all your
That sounds awesome.
The Black Fleet is all the buoy tenders and river tenders, and they do all the aids to navigation to keep the waterways safe so people can pass in and out. And then the small boat community, and that's predominantly search and rescue. And if you're, it depends on where you're at. Some of them had the 41-foot UTVs, and then if it was heavy surf, they had the 44-foot motor lifeboats. We were part of that. My second unit was Station Quileute River in La Push, Washington. And that's about 30 miles north of Cape Disappointment, which is the National Motor Lifeboat School. That's where they teach the surfmen how to do these boats. Now, 44, it's really powerful. It's very slow. And it's an open cockpit boat. And it's made for heavy surf. So it can roll over. It can self-right itself and self-bail itself. And it's made to do that. But it's cold and it's slow and it takes forever. If you ever roll over on one, it takes about 17 seconds and it's the longest 17 seconds of your life. But we were one of the guinea pig stations. Those boats had been in service for, I'd say, since their mid-70s, early 70s, and they were looking to upgrade. And of course, they were replaced by the 47-footers, which were not steel but aluminum, and the ribs were closer together, so they were faster and a little bit bigger, and that's what they use today. So a lot of coasties I've met after being out of the service have been like, where were you stationed? What did you do? And I was like, I was on the 44s in Quileute River, and they were like, dude, they don't even use those dinosaurs anymore. I was like, they shouldn't have been using them when I was in. There was old technology, but it's what we had. And I remember when we got our first 47, I was like, dude, this is like going from a Volkswagen to a Porsche. I mean, it was like, one, there was no rating for 0 to 60 because it couldn't do 60 miles an hour, and the other one was 0 to 60 in like 4 seconds. And it was just amazing the platform that they work with now versus what we worked with.
Right.
So
it came with all the latest bells and whistles.
Yeah.
So why? And I mean, you may not know this, but why aluminum? Is it because it wasn't a deep sea or an ocean vessel? It was meant for closer to shore.
It's lighter, and they found out. So on the 44s, it's like a 3/16 Corten steel from the deck level down. Everything above that is aluminum, so it can take a hit better. But on the 47s, they learned that they could do the same thing, all aluminum, just put the ribs closer together so there's not as much a risk of puncturing the hull. And because of the lighter weight, you get more out of the horsepower you have. Okay. So it's a faster response boat. Okay.
So on your Arctic missions, and then now on the current in Washington, what kind of clothing are you wearing when you're on the deck? And I know it depends on the weather. All that notwithstanding, like what are you wearing?
So on the polar roller, you'd get your cold weather gear issued every time depending on which department you were in and the mission, and you'd get that at the beginning of the trip. You'd turn it in at the end. It'd get laundered and usually reissued to someone else. Certain parts of it, of course, you got to keep your long johns and whatnot, but they'd give you the Mickey Mouse boots. Yep. Mm-hmm. And then you'd have a pair of bibs and the Eskimo jacket, and of course they'd give you like a gator toboggan type of deal, and everybody was issued several different pairs of sunglasses and sun goggles because, of course, in the ice, keratitis is a real thing, and it does happen. Even to this day, I can't be in the sun for longer than like 10 minutes without, if I squint that long, I get a headache. So I always have sunglasses. If I don't, I stop at a convenience store and buy a $15 pair of sunglasses. Yeah. I have to have them.
Yeah. I'm saying, but that's from the desert, not from the ice.
Right. Well, at the small boat station, you're issued basically that you get there, and your initial issue, you have a Mustang suit, which is a full body flotation device. The flotation in the arms and legs is pretty thin, but it will keep you afloat. It's more concentrated in the core of your body to help keep you warm and keep that portion of your body further out of the water. Because in Washington State, the water never gets above 50 degrees. So
does it activate on its own, or is it a manual?
It's just like a life jacket, but it's a full body life jacket. It's called a Mustang suit.
I'm not familiar with it. Yeah.
And then you also have a dry suit. And the dry suit, you have a bunny suit that goes on. It's like a fleece jumpsuit that you wear underneath it. and you step in through the chest of it. It has a neoprene seal around the neck and the arms, and it zips across the chest. The boots are sewn into it. So you put this thing on, and then you have to burp it, you know. And when you stand up, you pull the neck out, and you squat down and make yourself as small as you can. Try and push as much air out. When you stand up, it like vacuum sucks to your body.
Oh, wow.
And they're really nice, but it is encouragement, regardless, male or female, to keep your hair very short. Because those seals will pull any hair out trying to get your head through it. Didn't matter if you had talcum powder or whatever else, and they don't want you to use Vaseline because it deteriorates the seals.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, and of course, when you're wearing those, it's not easy to get out of if you have to use the restroom. So you just go. And when you get back, you wash it out, hang it up. I mean, there's a couple nights, you know, and you would occasionally have to get into the water, not super often, but yeah, it's pretty scary when you do, because what air is left in the suit automatically wants to go to the boots, so it wants you to float head down.
Right.
So you have to force your feet down and burp it again in the water, which lets in a little water, and of course automatically, I gotta pee.
Yeah.
You know, which was horrible. And at night, I'd say the worst part about being in the water, because they put the spotlight on what you have to swim to, not on you. And as you're swimming, you'd feel something bump you and be like, that's a log. That's definitely not a shark. It's not. I'm not going to let that. God. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you start feeling how small you actually are in a vast ocean, and that you are no longer anywhere close to the top of the food chain.
Yeah.
Also, orca whales are.
Up in Puget Sound up there. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they just out of nowhere, a pod will just show up, and you're like, oh no, I look like a goldfish. This is not going to end well.
The good thing about orcas is they're curious about human beings. They're not interested in eating us, thank God, because there's nothing that we could do to prevent them from eating us.
Exactly. And when you see one, they're roughly the size of a school bus.
They are so smart.
And you're like, I don't feel real comfortable about my life right now. Gonna get close with Jesus. I know we haven't talked in a while, but can you please get me out of this? You know, and I'm sure everybody has moments like that, but it's just one of those things you deal with. But yeah, that's typically, if you're doing surf operations, you would wear the dry suit, but it's a lot easier to get into your Mustang.
Man, if I bumped into something in the water, I would be done.
It's definitely.
I would be done.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. It's not something that you forget or something you take lightly the first time it happens. You're like,
I would be done.
I don't know what that was. I don't want to know what it was. I'm just gonna swim for the light. Swim for the light. Just get out of the water. Get on the boat. You know. But and it's pretty amazing doing that. We also had a couple of smaller fast response boats. Now they use safe boats, but we used to use a rib, the rigid hull inflatable boats. You know, and they got the big sponsons on them. Yeah. And that was pretty cool. They tried out when they were introducing the safe boat. We got to test drive those too. We were the guinea pigs for a lot of new things. But it was kind of one of those, like, hey, let's go out on the boat. And so anytime you had a chance, everybody loves the water. We were like, let's go out there. And
as long as it's not dark.
We had to do it in the dark too, because you have to do area familiarization tours day and night, so you can navigate during the day and during the evening.
Okay. Well, we'll keep this up in a little bit. Let's take a little break. All right. So, you're back in Washington, and you're still on the 47s?
44s.
Or 44s? Mm-hmm. Okay. How long were you stationed up there in Washington?
Except for training for A school and for boarding officer school and a couple other subsequent ones, my entire career.
Wow.
Until I was in the reserves. And that's when I came home to North Carolina.
Okay. So at what point did you go to the reserves?
That was November 18th of 1998.
Okay, so you were active Coast Guard for about 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's not too bad.
Yep.
When did, or I guess, how does a reserve Coast Guard force work?
So, essentially, And it was weird for me. I wasn't required to do my entire remaining service of my first enlistment as a reservist. You had the opportunity to either be active or inactive reserve. But I really wanted to make E5, and I did so in the reserves. I got the pinning. I never got the paperwork on it, so, which was kind of odd. But it's kind of like the National Guard. You do 1 weekend a month and about 2 or 3 weeks out of the year at one particular unit. Because most of my main focus towards the end of my active career was in the small boat community. I was stationed originally in Georgetown, South Carolina, and then they moved me to Station Oregon Inlet in North Carolina. And so, 1 weekend a month I would go and I would drill with them, but that unit was really, how do I say this? The officer in charge at that unit had something against my previous officer in charge at Quileute River. Obviously, there was some kind of static I didn't know about, but because I was part of Master Chief LaForge's Coast Guard, he told me, and I came to him, I said, I have skills and I could help train your crew on certain aspects of their job that'll make it easier for them and more vital to your mission. And he basically told me, as long as you're here, you will be my janitor. Yeah, so every month I would come and clean the dryers and the heads and swab decks.
So the skills that the Coast Guard and the American taxpayer paid for you to learn were doing nothing.
Not a thing. And then I basically told him, I was like, I don't have to do this. I could be inactive reserve. And he said, well, that's your choice.
Be my guest.
I said, well, can I put in a transfer? He said, if you still reside in the state of North Carolina, this will be your unit. So if you want to continue to be active reserve, leave the state. And we'll transfer you to a different unit. And I was like, that just doesn't sound...
No.
Well, I guess you can appreciate him being upfront about it.
Well, I basically told him, thanks for the bruises. You can keep the stool sample. I'm going home to the mountains. And that was the end of it there. I was like... Now, I didn't know at that point that if I would have given it about 6 months, I could have re-entered and gone back active again. And I should have after my first divorce. I didn't know it was an option until years later, and I had aged out, and then they upped the maximum age in which you can either re-enlist or still be in the U.S. Coast Guard, and I was already above that age limit. So I was like,
okay. So if your commander or station chief had been more accepting of your capabilities, what would you have been doing during your drill weekends or drill time?
So the biggest mission, especially at a small boat station, is, of course, search and rescue. Anytime there's anyone who's in peril on the sea, that's where the Mayday call comes into, is that particular station, given their position.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes to multiple stations. Whoever responds first is the one that has the lead on the call until we establish what position they're in and who's the closest to them, at which point they will deploy assets towards them. And given the nature of their distress, which assets get deployed. So typically there's a group that's in charge. That's like... how do I say this? So let's say you have like 4 stations. All right. Each one is about between 17, 20, 30 miles apart. And each one of them has an area of operation.
I mean, is that like actually what it is? 17, 20 miles apart?
That's when I was in Quileute River, 17 miles north of us was Nia Bay, and 30 miles south of us was Cape Disappointment and Grays Harbor.
Wow, that seems fairly close together.
when you're talking about a boat that only does 12 to 14 knots, you want more assets closer.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
And then at the group, which is usually an air station, that's where your air support comes from. So our group was Air Station Port Angeles in Port Angeles, Washington. And so, so basically, being as your normal mission is search and rescue, you drill on it a lot. So every day you get up, you shave, get your uniform on, and you go down to the boats to do the boat checks, daily boat checks. Make sure the engines run, all the lights work, sirens, bells, whistles, all of the gear that you would need to use for any type of mission is in good repair, and it's all marked and done. Once the boat checks are done, you come back, you have morning colors, and then you do quarters, which is like the morning meeting and muster, and they make sure everybody's there, and then they tell you what you're doing that day, who's on what boat. You got a first boat crew, second boat crew, standby boat crew, and who's running the comms room, and who your officer of the day is, engineer of the watch, all of that kind of stuff. So, and say in today's order of business, we're going to be getting underway to do man overboard training and tow training, or search and rescue training, like when you have a vessel in distress. And so one boat gets to be the active Coast Guard boat, and the other boat is the drill boat. You go out onto the ocean, and they're like, you do a fake distress call, and the comms room has to go through their whole thing, get the position. Then the second boat comes, and they throw you a line. You hook up in a rear tow until you get closer to the bar. They pull you alongside, and then you are towed back into the harbor. And you usually take a break for lunch, and then you go out and do it again, and then the roles reverse. And you do that like day in and day out, like almost every day you're out there.
I mean, while that would obviously create a well-trained crew, that seems like it would get very, very, very monotonous.
It does, but it produces a crew that you've drilled on it and trained on it so much that when you actually get an actual sortie or a case, you don't think about it.
Muscle memory.
You just do it.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're trained to do. And that's when it's very, pumped up, adrenaline, usually the worst kind of weather you can expect. And that's when you really have to be on your A game. And it gets to a point where all of your training, no matter what it was, day in, day out, you just do it. Yeah. And so you rely on your training. You keep that focus like so razor sharp that you don't have to think about it, and you don't second guess who's on your crew because you've served with them, and you know that person is trained the same way that you are. They know their job. They know most of your job, and vice versa. So if anybody gets taken out in the guise of the mission, now you're doing two jobs. Because you have to be a lookout as a crewman, you have to know how to do a round on the engines, you also have to know how to drive the boat if the coxswain were to get taken out, because that's part of your training. So it's not just wearing one hat, it's wearing every hat all the time, and that's why you constantly train, drill. And then when you're not the duty section, you still have a work day, and that's when you do all the subsequent trainings. How to pack the boat for, and pack your SAR bag, and how to use all of the implements of your SAR vest, which there's, a day and night flare. Of course, your signaling gear, a whistle, pencil flares and whatnot if you get tossed off the boat and you have to be able to signal someone like, hey, I'm over here. It's very difficult to find somebody in the ocean.
Yeah. The SAR is?
Search and rescue.
Search and rescue, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also you do a lot of first aid training, of course. Then there are things that are very niche to your unit or your station. In La Push, Washington, it's actually on an Indian reservation, the Quileute Indian Reservation. And they have 3 police officers. And they go home at about 3 o'clock. I mean, they basically roll the sidewalks up at this town. There's one convenience store, no stoplights. But because the Coast Guard station is there and it's manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, we're first response for fire, medical, and also because we have boarding officers, we can enforce federal law on the reservation. Whereas a local police officer, unless they're hired by that particular reservation, they
There's
cannot.
no jurisdiction there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that was pretty wild. And we had a really good working responsibility and relationship with the tribe. But there were some times, standing duty, and they're like, we'd get a call, and it's like it's a EMT call up in town. And so, of course, I'm grabbing the paramedic bags, and we're getting ready to run out to the 1 ton. And right before leaving, the Master Chief stopped me, and he said, before you leave, go to the armory and gun up. And I said, it's a paramedic call. And he's like, gun up, I'll explain on the way. And we're listening on the radio. Apparently, a lady had caught her husband cheating, and she was, while we were en route to them, still hitting him with a baseball bat while he was unconscious. So we had to de-escalate that first so that we could get him to care. And I was like, just another day in the Coast Guard. Yay.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, I was like, wow.
So, our previous Coast Guard guests, significantly younger than you. So we'll say post 9/11
Right.
Coast Guardsmen. You were for the most part, pre 9/11.
Yep.
So the Coast Guard back then was part of what department?
We were Department of Transportation.
Okay. What was that like? It kind of zoom out a little bit at the macro. What was that like?
Well, to us, it was just, business as usual.
Sure.
But how it looks to everybody else, and still to this day, a lot of that still exists, is you're not a real service. Because we were different. And the reason that they placed us in the Department of Transportation was because of the fisheries enforcement and all of the law enforcement that we actually do stateside. In order for the Army, Marines, Navy to do that kind of thing, there would have to be an act of war ongoing in the United States for them to be able to do that.
Which has not changed, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order for us to do it, we could not be Department of Defense. But if you look at history, the U.S. Coast Guard has been involved in every major conflict that the United States has been involved in, back to the beginning of our country. And although a lot of Navy guys don't want to admit it, it is the truth. The Coast Guard is the oldest seagoing service in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So
the Navy just celebrated its birthday last week.
Yeah.
So 9/11 happens. You've separated service at that point, or active service, I should say.
Yes.
So you're a reservist in North Carolina. We were talking about that. 9/11 happens.
I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, and I was working as a bartender at a restaurant, and I also, trained servers at this particular restaurant, and it was close enough to my house that I could walk. So I would walk to work about 1.5 miles, and I got up that morning, and I was walking to work, and I stopped at the city stop to get a cup of coffee on my walk to work, and when I walked in, the clerk there was like, "Did you see what's happening?" He had the TV on, and I saw the first tower hit, and I was like, "Oh, crap." And I immediately walked out and went back to my house. I could hear the phone ringing as I pulled, the keys out of my pocket. And I answered the phone, and I was like, "Hello?" And they're like, "Petty Officer Johnston." I'm like, "Yes." They're like, "You need to be at the Asheville airport like an hour ago." And I was like, "I'm on my way." Hung up the phone, grabbed my sea bag, immediately went to the bathroom, shaved my face because I had a decent beard going, and I was like, I'm getting reactivated. This is actually happening. I caught the last flight out of Asheville, and they flew me into Newark, New Jersey. I never even made it into the airport. There was a Coast Guard helo right there outside the plane on the tarmac, and they're like, "Petty Officer Johnston?" I was like, "Yes." Jumped on the bird. They flew me to Governor's Island, New York. A non-rate took my sea bag. They threw me a float coat and said, "Get on that boat." And we started evacuating Manhattan. And a lot of harbor patrols. I will never forget how thick the smoke was and that smell.
That acrid smell.
Oh,
yeah.
It had a taste to it, in the back of your throat. You never forget that. And it always you just wanted to, just scrape it out of your mouth. And it didn't matter what you did or how much you brushed your teeth. There's nothing that was going to get it out. And of course, it happened so fast. I didn't get to say goodbye to my girlfriend. She was already at work. I didn't get to call my parents or anything else, and I didn't have a cell phone.
Yeah, cell phones were not ubiquitous at this point.
Yeah, so
yeah,
I was just gone, and I was gone for 3 months. And when they finally released me to go home, something happened there. I came home, and of course, my girlfriend was like, I saw your sea bag gone, so I knew that, that was probably what happened. You got reactivated. And she said, but I haven't been able to get in touch with your mom. And I said, well, let me see if I can call her. And the first time I called her, there was no answer. And then about 2 days later, I got a hold of her, and I said, listen, I'm really sorry I haven't been in touch with you. And my mom and I speak about, once a week, twice a week sometimes. I actually called her collect from Antarctica, which was pretty amazing. 17-hour difference.
Not many people can say that they've gotten a collect call from Antarctica.
She loves to tell her friends about that one. But I said, I'm really sorry I haven't been able to get in touch with you and all this. And she said, I know, baby, I just got back. And I said, well, what do you mean? My mom is a nurse, has been my entire life. And she volunteers with the American Red Cross. And she's like, well, I've been in Manhattan, like real close to Ground Zero, doing work with the Red Cross. And I was like, are you kidding me? She's like, no. I was like in between Governor's Island, New York, and Manhattan for the last 3 months. We were literally less than 2 miles away from each other and didn't even know it. Huh. So that was pretty cool.
They called it Ground Zero for a reason.
Yeah, and it was kind of a I don't know how to put it into terms as far as when it was going on. I really didn't think a lot about it. It was just, once again, you go back to that muscle memory, that training, you just do it because that's what they need you to do. And they tell you what to do, and it didn't matter that I didn't know my coxswain and my crew because we're all standardized trained,
kind of
so
interchangeable in a good way.
Yeah. And you learned really quickly names of the people on your crew, and even though you didn't know them very well, you knew that you could trust them because of how they were trained, the same way that you were trained, and they learned that trust in you also. And it's not until you survive on this level of intensity to a point that it doesn't really register. Like, it's a lot of data going in, and you're processing the most important and key elements of that to be successful in whatever the mission is. When it finally calms down to a level and the adrenaline is gone and all of that emotion, you start processing and it hits you. It crushes you. Yeah. Like, all of a sudden, you start replaying it in your mind, and the look of fear on people's faces. Like, they look at you like you're more than human because you're not even responding to that emotional stress of it. You're just doing what needs to be done. You become human later after the fact, and it just tears you apart. And so it was very difficult. And I had to for a good while I had to seek therapy because it's something that even to this day kind of haunts you a little bit. Yeah. And it always has. And as I've grown and become a father, there were several rescues that we did, and I remember doing CPR on children, and you don't ever really register the ones that were okay, that you were successful in that endeavor. You remember every single one that you couldn't make a difference, that you were just too late, and it haunts you. So my biggest one was an 8-year-old girl, and I remember just absolutely just fatigue, burnout from swimming and getting her back on the boat, and then me and one of the other crewmen did CPR on her the entire way back to the tarmac, and then they pronounced her, and it didn't register at that moment. I just didn't have the bandwidth to process it.
You're still running on adrenaline at that point.
And like 2 days later, I sat down, and I think we were having evening chow, and I looked down at that plate, and all of a sudden it hit me, and I couldn't eat. I felt sick. I had to get up, and I walked out, and I was just a puddle for,
Yeah.
I had, of course the first boat coxswain and the engineer of the watch came in. They're like, "Are you all right? What's going on?" I was like, "I am not okay." And they were like, "I know this is probably a relapse moment from what happened a couple days ago." And it really bothered me that I could do it and not feel it. And then when you did feel it, you realize just how human you are in that emotion and in that moment. And I'm sure it's like that in other services, but you get to a point where you realize that you're not a superhero.
Yeah. I think it's important that your supervisor or the watch commander or whoever it was. I think it's great that they were able to immediately recognize what it was, obviously from their own experience as well, but then being able to spot it in other people, that's an important thing. So it's good that they were able to do it.
And in a lot of the vet organizations that I participate with, that's something that we all talk about, and that PTSD and whatnot. And I get asked a lot, what it was like in the Coast Guard, and I'm like, yeah, well, our war's a little bit different. It's not with other people; it's with every idiot that buys a boat. So essentially, and yeah, we stacked bodies in the Coast Guard too. We're just not the ones that killed them.
Yeah.
But it's still that same type of emotion. And there was so many times when, it would take the guy that left of me, or the guy that righted me, or somebody I was going to rescue, but not me. And that gives you a really bad, over time, it builds up inside of you, and you get this survivor's remorse. Like, why am I still here? What am I doing with my life that's so important that it wasn't my time to be checked out? It makes you feel really guilty to the point that it makes you question your own survival. And that's something that you have to, in the grand scheme of things, deal with, and do so in a positive way that you can continue to carry on and do the things that you not just want to do in life, but that you have to do, to be able to sustain and live. It's a lot. It's kind of a burden that not a lot of people understand.
Tell us about your tattoo.
The IGY-6.
Yeah.
So a semicolon, of course, is where you could have ended a sentence, but there was more.
Right.
And IGY-6 means I have your back. Most people have their 6 in red, but red, remember everyone deployed. Mine is black because you can't see red in the dark, and mine is also upside down because I know I have your back, but if I'm reaching for you, you can read it. But if I do that,
well done.
You can't see it.
Well done.
Yep. So
I think that's kind of on theme with what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of that reminder. A lot of my tattoos are, of course, nautical and themed that way. I talked about doing 78,000 nautical miles. You're supposed to get a sparrow tattooed for every 5,000. Yeah, I would not have room for any other tattoos on my body, so I never got the sparrows. But I did get my square knot on my wrist. If you ever see someone that has a square knot tattooed around that wrist, what that means is they've sailed all 7 seas.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
So
Cool.
I am a square knot.
Well, you've
sailor.
definitely done the Arctic, so which is probably most guys' list that they don't ever make it onto.
That's the one that's the hardest to get, and I did it.
You
first.
did it right off the bat. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and knock the hard stuff out.
Well,
And while we're at it, let's make a collect call to mom.
explain the shell system as far as going over the equators.
Okay, so if you cross the equator, you become a shellback.
Yeah.
If you cross the international date line, you become a golden dragon. If you cross them in the same place, you become a golden shellback. That's the certificate that I have.
Boom.
And it's funny. The international date line is kind of weird, and it's something everybody jokes about it at some point in the military. What are they going to do? Take away my birthday? It actually happened to a friend of mine. 'Cause we crossed at midnight on April 3rd, and it was April 5th when we were on the other side of it. And he was like, "They finally did it. They took away my birthday."
They found a way.
And I was like, "Told you it's not funny. Don't joke about that stuff."
What's Jeff Goldblum? Nature finds a way.
Yeah.
Right?
Nature finds a way.
Or Uncle Sam. One or the other, right?
Well, they have programs. Believe it. They have things they're not telling you. But yeah, that was. There's also several other initiations for Realm of the Arctic, and your Blue Nose, which I will tell you honestly, I wish I wouldn't have done that one. You actually have to submerge your entire body in Arctic water. It was not fun. That's the coldest I've ever been. I wouldn't wish that on a snake. Oof. Yeah.
Hard pass.
Yeah. And I thought, it'd be great. I've done a polar plunge before. No, it's a little bit more intense than that. It's really, really bad.
Is it just? I mean, is there like a time limit on it?
No, it's just as long as your entire body goes under the water, you can get right back out, and that's it. That's the final ice, and it's.
What's it worth to you?
It feels like a million knives being thrust into you.
So I've never been in that level of cold water, but I've done some polar plunges, and when you're in water that cold, like it's the only thing in the world you can think about.
Yeah.
You can't think of anything else in the entire world other than this right now.
Well, they do have a certain, depending upon which unit you go to. One of the ones I went to, of course, we had to do a survival swim, and they teach you about hypothermia by giving you hypothermia, so you know how your body responds to it. And even in the best survival gear, it's a pretty rapid onset. Yeah. Especially in an area where the water doesn't get above 50 degrees.
Doesn't even have to be freezing.
Yeah. So you usually have about 20 minutes maximum in the water before you start feeling the effects of it. And the way they did us, we actually had a training facility for it, and they called it the ice bucket. Now the water is already about 35 degrees, and then they have all these 55-gallon barrels of ice around it. And of course everybody gets in. It's only about, maybe belly button deep. So you have to crouch down and get it up to your shoulders, and they do that so that you keep most of the blood flow in the core of your body, insulating your body. And you have to do 14 minutes. That's why they do you 12 at a time. So the first minute, everybody's in. And then one at a time, you have to get out and do CPR on the dummy for a minute and get back in. So the effects of your body getting out of the water, being cold, and then having to get back into the cold water. Because that in and of itself is a training technique if a ship was sinking and you didn't have time to get on your gear and you had to get out, ship's flooding, you were probably going to be in those waters. Then it's going to be extremely cold, and you have to be able to make your body function so that you can get out to survive.
And you have minutes.
Yes. It's like you don't have time to think about it. You have time to do it. That's it. So, after 14 minutes, the bell rings and everybody who's still there passes. If you didn't, it's a pass-fail thing. You get challenged 3 times. If you don't, then you probably won't ever go to a unit where you have to be exposed to any type of hypothermia because you could not pass the training. But after that 14 minutes, it becomes about bragging rights. Who can stay the longest?
So I see all the services have this then.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
And, of course, all the instructors are taking bets. Now, mind you, when I went through this the first time, I think I was about 21 years old, and I had about 3% body fat. I was roughly 145 pounds, and so everybody was betting on me. They're like, Johnston's going to be the first one out. He's going to, if he makes it, he'll be the first one out. And I actually, at 18 minutes, was still in the pool with the instructor, and he was like, Johnston, I think you should get out. And I was like, I think you should get out. He's like, but your lips are purple. I'm like, your lips I couldn't see his lips. I was shaking so bad. I was like, your lips are purple. He's like, what do you say we get out together? I was like, that's a great idea.
That's a lie.
What a great idea.
It's a trick.
Well, we got to the edge, and he pushes up, and I push back, and I was like, I just wanted to make sure that everybody lost money on me today. And I made it 19 minutes, and getting out of that was, I had to be assisted. I couldn't open my hands.
You're locked up.
Yeah, I had, and it took so long for me to feel like I was warmed up properly internally that, of course, I spent a good 12 hours in sick bay because they were like, we want to make sure that you didn't permanently damage yourself. We would have pulled you out in another minute anyway. And I was like, I'm fine.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm fine.
So when did you completely retire from the Coast Guard?
February of 2002.
Okay.
And
we're going to go into your post-career, but would you do it all again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it was a choice I made in myself. It was an investment I made in myself that just growing up the way I did and growing up on the water, it was something that, some days I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? But most days I was like, I can't believe they pay me to do this. Look at all this cool gear I get to use. Yay, let's go Coast Guard.
How long did it take for your dad to stop asking you why the Coast Guard?
It was shortly after I was released from active duty, and I came home. My dad, he's very proud of his service, and on occasion he'll talk about it. Not so much what he did, but just about the Navy. Mm. But you'll never see a picture of him in the Navy. You'll never see a plaque or an award or a shadow box or no. It's just not who he is. But I came home, and walking into my parents' house, I think I had been home maybe once or twice during that 4-year span, and they had moved once when I was home, so they didn't have everything fully unpacked. But when I came home after being released from active duty, I walked in, and of course my sister's wedding picture, I have one sister, and her wedding picture was there. It's very big,
Of course.
Mom and Dad were really proud. And right next to that is my Coast Guard picture, and it's only slightly smaller. And then all of the stuff that I didn't have room for, all these certificates that I had won and all of this, and correspondence that I had left my mom. Of course, she put them in, and it went all the way up the stairs. It was like, this is Chris's Love Me wall, and then at the top was Keith's and all of his Army stuff. He was 82nd Airborne, also I think Corps of Engineers. He was like a combat engineer or something like that. And he and I don't really talk about the Army that much, other than if he's gonna give me a hard time, and then I have to fire back. But yeah, it was just weird seeing that. And I asked my dad, I said, so why, after all of that grief and whatnot? He said, I didn't think you were gonna do it. He said, I always
bet you won't.
He said, I always, like, from the time you were a little kid, I knew you were always going to be the one that was going to give me resistance. And if you said you were going to do it, you were saying it for shock value. I didn't think you would do it. And I was like, then why's all my Coast Guard stuff? He's like, because every single time you got one of those was one of the proudest moments of my life as your dad.
It's a good dad.
And I was like, whew.
Yeah.
And this is before I was a father, and of course, now being a father, I have 4 children, and I'm like, you were right. I was wrong. I thought I knew. I don't know anything. He's like, it gets better. It gets better. He said, trust me. He said, you're doing the right things. It just, they don't come with an instruction.
Hang in there.
Yeah. So, and that was a good moment, actually. And yeah, everybody that has come over to my parents' house, even now they live in Bryson City, and it's their forever home, their retirement home. And
I want to retire there.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Yeah.
But
for real,
you walk in, and of course, the only thing that he has up on the walls that is his is like 4 different deer head, and he's very proud of those because they're pretty big bucks, but. Other than that, it's all of his kids. And, of course, that big Coast Guard picture is still there. And everybody's like, oh, is that your son? He's like, yeah, I'm so proud of that kid. He was in the U.S. Coast Guard.
But don't tell him. Don't tell him that.
Yeah, oh, he wouldn't say it to me.
Of course not.
I've heard it in another room, and I'm like, Dad, you really do like me.
Okay. Well, you joined during a relative period of peace. And then 9/11 happened, and you were already out of active service by then. But then after that, you continued on all the way up to retirement. When we started talking to you about coming on the show, this was, I don't know, 2 months ago?
Well, yeah, multiple months, yeah. Yep.
That was before Hurricane Helene hit. And we would normally ask about things that you took from your time in service that you've been able to apply to your post-service life. But having, your childhood home ravaged by an unprecedented hurricane, how has your time in service, the skills you learned, whether it's actual physical skills or coping mechanisms that you've developed from your time in service, how has that translated to what is currently going on in Western North Carolina?
Well, first of all, just given the training that I received in the military, I have several different types of bug out bags. I have a med kit, and I have my 3-day kit, and then I have my excursion kit, which is, with the chainsaw and, different things. And of course, several emergency supplies that can just be readily chunked in a car and let's go. But as far as like the training that you fall back on, once again, it's, we always used to say in the Coast Guard, you got to go out. You don't got to come back. It just applied, and this was something very close to my heart. I'm a builder, a carpenter now, and I work in Asheville and Black Mountain, and have been for about the last 3 years. It's where the money is, especially if you're a carpenter. But I had just come off of 3 weeks in Asheville. We're building this really nice house. And I was going to stay an extra week. If I would have stayed that week, I would have been caught right in the middle of Helene. But I came home, and I called my best friends. Both of them live in the same area. And I called them Wednesday night. And I said, it looks like it's going to make landfall. And they're saying that it's probably going to come up your way. Do you have stuff ready? Do you have a plan to get out? Yada, yada, yada. They're like, yeah, we're going to hunker down. I was like, do you need to evacuate? If you need a place to go, I live in Fayetteville. My home's open to you. They're like, no, I think we got this. And then, it happened. And shortly after it happened, and seeing some of the things come in, what limited things they did have on the media, just my mind was just going a million miles a minute. And I couldn't sit still. And of course, my wife is watching me get up and down and wring my hands and all of that. And she said, I got 2 questions to ask you, hon. And I said, yeah, what's up? And she said, how much more packing do you have to do, and when are you leaving? And I said, a little bit more packing, and tomorrow morning. She said, do you think you can get up there? Because most of the roads are closed. And I was like, that's my playground. I know about 200 different ways into Buncombe County, and I have a chainsaw and plenty of gas. I can make it. And she said, well, just call me when you can and be safe. Promise me you'll be safe. And I said, I will. And I got in the car and left. I made a brief stop in Hickory at my sister's house just to let her know that I was going up there, and to make sure that my brother-in-law has a couple of my firearms in his safe, and so I wanted to make sure I had my revolver with me just in case wildlife or other possibilities, just it's better to be armed.
Better to have and not need than to need
Right.
and not have. Yeah.
So, and he said, well, how are you going to go up? And I said, well, I know that they're going to have a couple of the backways blocked. I said, I'm going to try to go up 40 first. And if I get turned around there, then I'll probably go back down through Old Fort and come around through Gateway Mountain and come up back down into Black Mountain on number 9 or out through Fairview. And he was like, all right, well, let me know how far you make it, if you can get any kind of cell service. And I told him that I'd briefly spoken to one of my friends the morning of leaving for the area. And I got almost all the way to Black Mountain on I-40, and of course then it was blocked off because there was a little landslide there on 40 coming up Old Fort Mountain. And I guess he was a DOT worker or maybe a police officer. It didn't look like he was in like uniform, but he did have a weapon and a responder radio, whatever. And there was no traffic behind me when I got up there. And he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going home." And he said, "Well, this is blocked." I said, "It's okay. Just if you can help me get turned around." I said, "I'll find another way up." I said, "But I'm still going home." And he, of course, looked at my car, and I have a big IGY-6 sticker on it, and U.S. Coast Guard, and all these other vet decals, hither, thither, and yon. And he said, "Hold on a second." And he stepped away from the car, got on his radio for a second, and he said, "Okay, follow that guy in the track hoe." And now I drive a little Toyota Yaris. It's like a pregnant roller skate. But he could tell I had it packed to the hilt with, three chainsaws, med kits, like paper towels, water, like all of this. And I'm like, "I'm going home, bro. I mean, it's happening, whether you're going to let me through this way or not." And he said, "Follow that guy in the track hoe." And they scraped just enough of the road for me to get.
For your roller skate?
Yep. To push me through. And I was like, if you can't, you can pick the car up and just put it on the other side with the excavator. But no, they let me through, and I made it all the way up to Black Mountain. And, once again, I was still on that emotional adrenaline high of like being able to get there and being able to help my people. And I had a mission in mind. I needed to make sure that my friend Lou and Archer were okay, and they live on Flat Creek, which I knew that place was going to get hit pretty hard, and that's right outside of Black Mountain. Flat Creek is the river that comes out of Montreat. Mm-hmm. And then my best friend Jeremy, he lives in Swannanoa, and I knew that where he was in Swannanoa on Old 70 was also a very heavily impacted area as well. And he's the one I got to speak to, but he didn't get to talk long. And while he had signal, he sent me a couple videos, and it just how high up the water was. He was like, I've never in my life seen anything like this. He's like, I could hear people screaming for help, and I couldn't do any. He said, I wanted to drop my bass boat in the water and go and see if I could help him. He said, but what if I hit a power line? He's like, I would have been a casualty too.
Yeah.
He said, I had to assess that risk of do I risk it all to save someone else and possibly damage myself, or do I prioritize myself? And I was like, bro, you're really hitting the nail on the head here. I said, and that's a choice that everybody's got to make. But you can't save anyone else if you can't save yourself first.
It's true.
So I think you made the right choice. I said, and keep it. And of course, his mother lives there. She's recently an amputee, and so he was super worried about that. But I wanted to make sure that she was okay and he was okay. And then, of course, my wife's uncle lives up on Beatree Road, and I knew that place was hit really hard. So first day, Lewis and I said, I need to go and check on Uncle Jim. And he's a Navy vet. I was like, he's not going to come off that mountain, but I need to make sure he's got supplies and whatever he needs. And so we were able to drive probably 2 or 3 miles down Beatree Road, and then we had to hike the rest because the road was just washed out, gone. And of course we get out, and my buddy Loomis is carrying my big medical backpack, and I had my supply backpack on and my revolver on my hip, and he's wearing what we call Appalachian Reeboks, the mud boots. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we got out and started walking, and there was a few people that were walking down the road in front of us, and they were, maybe 150 yards ahead of us, or what was left of the road. And we passed a couple different groups of people that were actually doing work, trying to restore a path into that area. And they looked fairly official, but I couldn't tell you if they were with any particular entity or if they were just civilian or whatnot. But they looked pretty well organized, safety vests and whatnot. And they didn't say a lot. And then we passed another group, and one was a Buncombe County Sheriff, and the guy had a jacket on that had a FEMA seal on it. And they stopped the people in front of us and turned them around to come back. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to be good. And Loomis looked at me, he said, I think we'll be just fine. And we got up there, and he said, just keep walking like you own the mountain. And we kept on it. They didn't even bat an eyelash at us. I said, you guys good? And be like, getting supplies back in here real quick. And they just let us go. And so we hiked the last 4 miles in there, found Uncle Jim, and of course he was like, well, I got plenty and I'm good and all of this. And I was like, well, let us leave you some water and some medical supplies in case you run into somebody who might need them. And, you know, a couple little odds and ends. And I had, you know, 5 or 6 of those little 1 pound propane canisters. I was like, if you can use them, fine. If you find somebody that needs them. And I left him a few gallons of water. And and we made sure that he was okay. And then we hiked back out. And it was that night. And of course, it's so dark. There's no power.
And
it's dark when there is still power.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's Black Mountain. Now it's Dark City. They call it Dark City for a reason. The sun doesn't rise there till 10.
And this was the day after the storm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was so dark and so quiet. It was that lull in the storm where the emotion of it started to hit me again. And my buddy Lewis is not military, but he's been one of my best friends for almost 20 years. He was one of the first people that I met prior to my service, him and Jeremy, and we've done construction together for years and years. And he was like, what's in your head? And I was like, I don't think you want to know. And he's like, no, I don't want to know, but I think you need to say it. And I was like, it's kind of like a bad dream. It's kind of like I can't wake up from it. It's kind of like it's happening all over again, and it's happening so fast I don't know how to process it. And he was like, but I knew you would be here. I knew that you would hold true to that word. You've always been that friend that would walk into hell and slap the devil to get to somebody. And I knew you would be here. He said, that's why there was no look of shock when I saw you this morning. And I knew that whatever you were going to do, I got your back because you had mine. And it was just to see the community in that area and people that I've built for previously and people that I've known for years and years all come together. Even though there was a lack of, you know, federal support, if you will, and whatever else, the community came together and they were feeding each other out of their freezers before things went bad. And there was, you know, if you had it, you were giving it for someone else. And we started shoring up, you know, people's mobile homes that had been washed out from underneath, you know, just so they could have a sustainable place to live until they figure out their next, you know, move. And it was rough, you know, dead pets and seeing pajamas being washed down the river that those weren't just pajamas, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot of data to process. And so anytime that got too much, I would throw myself back into doing more work or reaching out or calling to check on somebody. And if it was still too much, I would call my wife and be like, I need a safe place to land. I got to unload some of this. Can you just listen to me for a minute? And yeah, she's a saint. So of course,
that's a good woman.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that she was one of God's prototypes. They don't make them like that anymore. You know, I think she has bad judgment too. She chose me. So.
Right. Never make fun of your wife's choices because you were one.
You were one, correct. So, but you know, honestly, there is a little bit of there's still so much work to do there. But there is a lot of normalcy moving back into that. And there's just a general sense of kind of like post 9/11, you know, where it took something so devastating to unite everyone.
Isn't that weird about human nature?
It is.
How that works.
Because they don't care what church you go to or even what area you lived in. Everybody was impacted in some way, but everybody was united, you know, and it was like the entire crew. And I met a lot of different organizations that were there doing good truck, the red truck guys, and you know, Samaritan's Purse, and like all of these different, you know, organizations doing stuff. Another veteran buddy of mine had
the Hillbilly Air Force.
Yeah, the Hillbilly Air Force.
Yep.
And the Cajun Navy.
Of course, the Cajun Navy.
Yes.
God bless those boys.
Yeah, and they're just so great. So many interesting
Those are
people.
real Americans down
Yeah,
there.
and I was just like, God, like it really puts a little bit of a pep in your step, and you're like, it's no reason that people that exist like that are still doing the things that they do, and a lot of these guys are either good old boys or they are veterans, and
or both.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. It's like you can train a brain to think some way, but they never untrain you to not think that way anymore. It's still part of you.
Still coming to terms with this.
Yeah. And it's like I have to. And, I did get to call my mom this time on my way to Asheville. And I told her I was heading back to do relief work and whatnot. And I said, I'm going to go ahead and apologize to you if I don't get to talk to you in the next couple of days, and please don't think, I said, I'm sure you do. You think I'm crazy. She said, honey, I know you're crazy. And I said,
We're
okay.
so far around the bend at this point, yeah.
Yeah, she said, it would be less crazy if you weren't going.
Amen.
So, and I was like, okay, well, at least we're all on the same page there. But I'm glad that it is starting. There are certain aspects that are starting to come back together. There are certain places that do have water, and there are certain places that haven't been reached yet. And they're still finding more and more every day. It is just decimated.
Biblical.
Yeah, there's no way that anybody could have prepared for something like that. And it happened so fast. I met a guy, and he had dislocated his shoulder. And he said, and broke his toe all in the same evening. When it happened, he said, I looked outside and I saw the water rising up. And he said, I went and put my iPad in the top of my closet with 2 of my cats. And I didn't know if I was ever going to see that again. He said, when I turned around, the water was up to my knees in my house. And by the time I got to the living room, it was almost up to the ceiling, and I had to swim underneath my refrigerator that was floating to get out. And I broke my toe kicking off the refrigerator to get outside and on top of my trailer. And by the time I was on top of my trailer, the whole trailer was floating and moving downriver. It got stopped by a bunch of trees, and I climbed up into the tree, and my trailer made it another 50 feet down the river before it stopped again. He said, but when the water receded, he said, I slept in the tree. And the next morning, I went back to my house, had to wait. It was about waist deep. He said, but both my cats were still alive, and the top of and my iPad hadn't been soaked. He said, I don't know what that means. I don't know how. And I was like, that's crazy. He
God
said,
likes cats?
Yeah, maybe. He said, but when I got into the tree, it was only about 4 feet up to the branch. Well, when I woke up, I was about 18 feet off the ground.
How do I get down?
Yeah, he's like, and that's where I dislocated my shoulder, was because coming out of that
Trying
tree.
to shimmy down.
I kind of screwed up there, but
God bless him, oh, man.
It was amazing, and these are genuine people. It's just it's hard to like put that into perspective if you've never lived through something like that. And I've thanks to the Coast Guard, I've done hurricane relief before, and I've been through some of these bigger storms, especially in the Pacific Northwest. It happens more than you think about, and that's usually when you get a case, is during one of these storms. That's when things go south for everybody. So it's very difficult to ascertain like how you're going to respond to that, or how you're going to train for that, or how you're even going to react to that when it happens, because you don't know until it actually happens.
Yeah.
And so I would say ultimately, as an answer to your question, my training gave me a little bit of a leg up, because I haven't been through that particular situation before, but I've been through something that requires a certain stamina and a certain calm in your spirit to be able to get whatever mission is in front of you done.
And a certain level of preparedness.
Right, to not let that emotion get to you and deter from actually being successful in the mission.
Yeah.
So it's still a lot, and it's getting better slowly. And it's just amazing to see that united spirit of everyone coming together and watching it happen.
Well, Chris, thank you for sitting down with us and talking to us and sharing your story. We're glad that all your people are okay. That's for sure. But yeah,
Also,
thank you. This has been great. obviously the Coast Guard being the small service, there's really barely anything that we know. So yeah, you have enlightened us for sure.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you asking me to be here. It's been my pleasure to talk to you guys. Once again, I'm very proud of my service. It's probably one of the accomplishments of my life that I'm most proud of. And it was great talking to you guys. I appreciate you bringing me on.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Well, and our second Coast Guardsman.
Coasty.
What do you think?
That was really cool. I think one of the things that makes particularly Coast Guard stories so interesting, like Cody's and Chris's, is because we don't know anything about them, because it's not part of DOD. It's a small entity, so you don't really think about it. And so those stories of crushing ice and being thrown from one side of the ship to the other, to try to break ice free, stories like that, or even the actions after 9/11. It's not something that you ever really think about. So, I mean, it was really cool to hear those stories.
Yeah. I didn't realize he was so involved with 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, hearing him talk about it, of course, it makes sense that the Coast Guard would have, some sort of role. But it wasn't really anything that I thought about until he was talking about it. Like, of course the Coast Guard would have been there. But I hadn't thought about it.
Right.
And it's been over 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the way, if I do say so myself, I love the way we tied all of that in to the actions of the last few weeks here in reference to Hurricane Helene and the rescue efforts that are still ongoing as it's 21st of October right now. They're still ongoing, but what a great guy.
Yeah. And his training and his mental resilience and everything obviously has helped in the aftermath of the hurricane, but his preparedness that he learned through the Coast Guard, through his time in service, had to have been invaluable. Whether it's from him being on the in the reserves and always having his sea bag ready to go, to being retired and then still having everything prepared with rations, medical supplies, chainsaws, and gas.
Different go bags.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, he had a great story, and I'm glad he was willing to sit down and talk to us about it. And of course, we're also very glad that all his people are okay after the hurricane. It can take your house, it can take your car, it can take your internet, but you can get all those things back. You can't get your life back.
Right.
So.
All right. Okay. Any parting shots on Mr. Johnston?
I have called my parents from various places across the globe. And of course, parents are parents, and they're going to be glad to hear from you, right? But I imagine that if I had called my parents from Antarctica...
Collect.
I imagine that is a story that they would tell everyone they came across to. That is a very cool story.
How many people listening to this don't even know what calling collect means? I don't know. Pull out your smartphone and Google search it.
Oh, man.
Can you imagine how much easier your life would have been at certain points if you had a mobile device you could just whip it out and call people on?
Yeah. That's...
Because remember the flip side to call and collect was the prepaid cards.
Yeah.
Those things were literally money. I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. But, yeah, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris, for coming on the show.
Yes. Your story's
We'll
great.
definitely be in touch. So, okay. Shifting fire.
To Free Fire?
To the Free Fire area. All right. The last one of these I led was Pumpkin Spice, which was a memorable one to be sure. We'll go a little more serious on this one. But it is open-ended in that it's kind of a counterfactual. So this will be airing the first week of December.
Mm-hmm.
So in the spirit of the first week of December, how would history have gone differently had the Japanese chosen to not go the spectacular route and bomb us at Pearl Harbor?
If they had not bombed us at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. would have continued to squeeze and constrict their means of getting oil,
oil primarily,
and gas. But then also, their one major export, if I remember correctly, was silk. And rayon had just been within a few years of 1941. Rayon had just been introduced and was taking over a lot of the silk products.
Right.
So we were already destroying their number one export, and the American government was doing it intentionally with the restrictions that they placed on Japan. Mm-hmm. If we had not been bombed at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, I think that we would have still ended up in war because our policy, our unwritten policy of bringing Japan, or I guess making them bow to our economic might, was pushed too far, and instead it was essentially utilized to break their back economically rather than slowing them down. It would have pushed them too far, which is what that ultimately led to. So
right.
I think it still would have happened. Not necessarily Pearl Harbor, but I still think that we would have wound up in war.
Yeah, I mean, I by and large agree with you on that. I think had they chosen to not go it's almost like the Al Qaeda, right? We're gonna go for the big spectacular attack, as opposed to the ratchet, the
slow escalation.
Right. So the Philippines was an American protectorate at the time. It had been a colony during our short, misguided colonial period at the turn of the century, and was on its way to legitimate independence, kind of guided by us. Mm-hmm. And then the Japanese invaded. They would have still taken the Philippines. And if they would have done it a little more shrewdly, I don't think there's anything that the United States, I think people would have rented their garments and made a big scene about it. But I think in the late 1940s, obviously 41, I don't think there was really a belly. The American people did not have the guts to want to go to another war again. Just keeping in mind the timeline. I mean, the World War I is in the not too distant rearview mirror. Yeah. I think if Japan would have been more incremental, they would have been able to take a lot more
before our involvement.
And I mean, if we're speaking in counterfactuals, of course. I mean, what would we have done about the Philippines? The answer, and my guess, is probably nothing. We would have made a bunch of noise about it, and the American forces would have been, expulsed from it. And
since we're playing with the counterfactuals, say they wait a few years. Say it's 1943. The Philippines are granted their independence. Japan immediately turns around and invades. We would have thrown, like you said, oh, it's so horrible, stop it. We would have then increased our embargo on trade with them increased our restrictions on trade with them, further bringing them to their knees, and then they openly attack, combining our two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would call that the most dangerous course of action.
There is a book, and I cannot remember the author, but it is called Bankrupting the Enemy. And it is the second book in a series. And it is all about the economic warfare that we played against Japan before we were actually at war.
Yeah. Is that the one you lent me?
Yes.
Okay.
And it is very well written. And as much as our bureaucrats thought they were being clever in coming up with all these ways to screw over Japan, the Japanese were onto that game and were playing fast and loose with some numbers in their banks here in the United States. And when we seized those assets, there were no assets to seize.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting book, and I am not in any way an economist or in any way inclined towards numbers above basic algebra. But it was fascinating.
Yeah.
It was really interesting.
The four instruments of national power.
Yeah.
DIME, D-I-M-E, and we've talked about two of them here. So some people have added extra letters onto the end of that acronym.
Somebody always wants to, make their contribution, and anyway.
Okay, well, we honor our Pearl Harbor. I believe we lost our last survivor. I believe it was last year. So,
or was it early this year?
It could have been. It may have been earlier this year. Yeah. I forget the gentleman's name now, but I mean, there was a big article published about it. I believe our last Pearl Harbor survivor is no longer with us. So we honor the memories of our Pearl Harbor survivors, and of course any of their families. I know we're getting pretty far removed from that date in history, as this tends to happen.
But Pearl Harbor Day will be a few days after this episode airs, if I remember the calendar correctly. So, yeah.
So, Greatest Generation. Okay. Winding this down. It's the holiday season, so we encourage everybody to please check out our partners, Aerial Resupply Coffee and Hero Soap Company. Yeah,
stocking stuffers. Get yourself a box of whatever flavored K-Cups or little. He
does have the Christmas kitty, the flavored seasonal stuff. So
even now in mid-October, the seasonal stuff has already been released, and for all you terrible people out there, there is a pumpkin spice. Yes.
Just don't get pumpkin spice Cheerios, apparently. And also, for Hero Soap Company, they do have a large bundle that you can buy.
Yeah.
So use our Tracer Burnout code to help defray some of that cost, but it's very reasonable and great stocking stuffers, and you will not smell like a foot.
Which is a big step up for you.
Hey, ask me how I know.
All right. Well, make sure you like and subscribe, share with friends, family,
give us a review,
other veterans, write a review, leave a ranking or whatever. Follow us on all the social medias and stuff, and remember, your service matters.